Welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Myron Belkine, the club's vice president, and I want to say that we are truly honored that the Hard Question has chosen the National Press Club as the venue for the first of its nationally televised conversations on the future of energy policy. The National Press Club is known as the place where news happens, and that motto is fulfilled this evening with two panel discussions. First, on the President's agenda, the future of traditional energy versus alternatives, and then the second on climate change, science or hype. Coincidentally, as you all know, President Obama himself made clear in his inaugural speech on Monday that these energy issues will definitely form an important part of his agenda for his second term. And so tonight's discussions, or dare I say debates, are especially timely. I want to thank Blanquita Cullum, a very distinguished broadcast journalist and a former member of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, for bringing this program with its outstanding panelists to the National Press Club. And I want to congratulate her and her team on its success when the pilot programs were aired last July. We know that tonight's discussions will build on that success. Thank you again, and congratulations, Blanquita. I am now honored to turn over the floor to the Honorable Pete Olson, a member of Congress from Texas since 2009, and who serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and who will give his welcoming remarks.
Good afternoon. Or as we say in Texas, howdy, y'all. Welcome to the first of 4 planned debates on the energy challenges America and the world face in the upcoming years. Again, I'm Pete Olson, and I proudly represent Texas 22, a suburban district from Houston. I'm on my 3rd term in Congress, 20 days into that one, and my 2nd term on the Energy and Commerce Committee. The panels we have there are sponsored by The Hard Question with our good friend Blanquita Cullum, or BQ, as we know her. It's a weekly TV program that tries to educate the American people about energy issues, and we need education. One example from Congress. Remember the oil spill we had in the Gulf of Mexico? Shut it down. Oil was coming out for a better part of 3 months. Naval aviator, 100 submarines. One of my colleagues came up to me and said, Pete, why can't we have one of our submarines go down there, put a torpedo in the well, shut that baby up, blow it up, and shut it up? Okay, a couple problems. First of all, we have no torpedoes that can do that anymore. Our torpedoes blow up when they hit the propellers of some ship, they track the turbulence in the water, or they sense the metal of the ship. Nobody hits the target anymore. The real big problem that people don't understand is just the pressures involved in deep water and drilling underground. If we have a submarine go down past 1,500 feet, remember, that was down about 9,000 feet. Somewhere about 1,500 feet, you hear this like a Coke can being crushed. And that is the whole of that submarine being crushed. So I say that as an example of how people don't understand what's going on out there and how amazing our energy industry is. We have 2 panels this afternoon. The first panel is the President's agenda on the future of traditional energy versus alternatives. This panel right here. Starting on at 5:30, that's 6:30, about 45 minutes from now. We've got the second panel, climate change, science or hype. And that's why they call this the hard question. But none of this would be possible without a gentleman we lost, Pat French. His brother's here with us this afternoon. Pat made this all possible. We lost him right after Christmas, I believe. Is that correct, Mike? Of this past year. So thank you for what your brother did for this show and what he's done for America. And as we say in Space to the USA, 3, 2, 1, liftoff. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Myron, and thank you so much, Congressman Pete Olson. And I want to welcome all of you, members of Congress, members of the press, and energy experts, and all of the friends and those of you, ladies and gentlemen, that are joining us tonight. Well, welcome to the many panels that we will have in the future here at the National Press Club, where we will ask the hard question. And as Congressman Pete Olson and Myron said, my name is Blanquita Cullum. And we're going to have a different kind of a dialogue here. In fact, we're going to discuss the future of energy, not just for the United States, but for the entire world. As many of you really realize that energy is one of the most, in fact, I believe it is the most important issue of our age, and it's going to affect every single one of us. So, you know, it deals with the basic things. How do people fuel their cars? Basically, how do they keep their jobs, employ themselves, you name it. Every aspect affects each and every one of us. So now we deal with the implications that come from the environment, the implications that involve the economy. And so this is one of those issues that is so contentious that it even threatens to destabilize the most powerful nations of the earth. And in fact, there are a few issues, save religion, that have motivated total wars. The dialogues that you're going to hear today are going to be passionate, intense, and we hope they will be very educating for you. And I want to thank this great group of panelists because they are very courageous to come up here and sit together and have a conversation. Have a dialogue. Isn't that what we do well as Americans? We influence the entire world with our First Amendment. So basically, we believe it's time that we have real dialogues from the people that are powerful, articulate, who make the decisions, and have really studied the research, and our scientists. So with that, we have a couple of ground rules, okay? Just a couple. To be concise and to be civil. We also will be passing around cards to those of you if you want to write a question, because we believe that you will have your own hard questions to ask, and we invite that. We invite you to ask a hard question. We are not intimidated by the hard question, because we believe we can do anything if we're not afraid to ask the hard question. So again, I want to pay tribute, of course, to our dear friend, the late Pat French, because without Pat French, who had the vision, none of this would have happened. For the Foundation for Energy Education, we bless him, we praise him, and we keep his memory with us every day. And of course, I have to thank the staff of The Hard Question, Samantha Smith, our wonderful Vice President, Andrew Wright, James Cullum, Jan Duplain, Will McDonald, and we very much are honored to be here at the National Press Club with our great friends, Bill McCarran and Myron Belkine. So, we encourage you after this to go to our website, to thehardquestion.com, but let's get right to it, don't you say? Let me introduce you to the panel. The panel features, starting from the end, Bruce Vincent, the president of Swift Energy, immediate former chairman of the Independent Petroleum Association of America and the Natural Gas Council. Next to him, Douglas Kane, the president of Lake Truck Lines and Oilfield Services from San Antonio, Texas. John Hofmeister is the founder of Citizens for Affordable Energy, past president of Shell Oil Company, former chair of the U.S. Department of Energy's Hydrogen Technology and Fuel Cell Advisory Committee. We see him all the time on television. Kevin Book, head of research. He's the head of a research team at Clearview Energy Partners and previously the senior vice president of energy policy, oil, and alternative energy research at the Capital Markets. Herbert Hunt, an advisor to the management of PetroHunt, former president of the American Association of Drilling Contractors, former chairman of the National Offshore Industries Association. Duncan Wood, Director of the Mexico Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Institute for International Center of Scholars, and he formerly was a senior energy consultant with the Mexico Institute and senior associate with the Americas Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And David Martineau, Chairman of TIPRO and Exploration Manager for Pitts Oil. He is an acting member of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, and the Dallas Geological Society. We thank you all so much for joining us on our first flight here. And as we say with a hard question, the conversation starts now. The president obviously said in his second inaugural address that he has vowed to address the challenge of climate change. Well, as you know, we're going to get into this because it's been said real change is not about people, but about the moment. Is this the moment where the president wields the change? Is it appropriate, and what does it mean? Let's talk to you, Bruce Vincent, as we begin this discussion. What is it going to mean to the future of natural gas and the oil industry?
Well, I think if you listen to a lot of the rhetoric during the campaign, both sides talked about an all-of-the-above strategy. And I think our perspective is that we're very hopeful that the president will truly embrace a real all-of-the-above strategy, which certainly incorporates the use of natural gas. Natural gas brings a lot of benefit, not just the economic activity that the development comes from, but the fuel source as well, that America holds in abundance over every other nation in the world. And it can do remarkable things from a standpoint of energy security, economic well-being of our country, as well as its impact on reducing emissions in the climate.
But John Hofmeister, there's a rumor out there that he is going to start limiting the exportation of natural gas. Is this going to impact the future of the success of natural gas? Why do you think the president is proceeding in that direction?
Well, I think there are a number of issues that this raises, the most fundamental of which is we really don't know where we're going or how to get there because there is no plan, there is no framework, there is a lot of activity taking place, mostly by the industry. But when you look to what is possible or what is not possible, from a government standpoint, we're basically in the midst of a national food fight in terms of should we, shouldn't we, can we, can't we, will we, won't we. And we have such a partisan divide on this matter that extends from the White House to the Congress, to the State House, to the state Congresses, that we as a nation we're blessed with an industry that will take advantage of every chance it has to do what it thinks is in the industry's interest. And that's where LNG comes from, and that's what is promoting the whole question of export LNG. But frankly, the industry is facing so many barriers, not just from the LNG export question, but so many other opportunities we face, that absent a plan, a coherent, organized plan that takes into account a short, a medium, and a long-range focus, I think we're just going to incrementalize our way forward, and to me, that's not good enough.
Kevin, you'll notice I'm going to jump around here. Kevin, let me ask you about this, because I know that you have a great insight in this whole way the Congress is working with it. Let's take a look at, is there a strategy here? Does the president, before it was an all of the above strategy, has it changed? And how do you see that being implemented through the Congress? Will the president work with the Congress or go it alone? How do you see it?
Well, the moment we are facing right now is one where presidential leadership will shape a lot of what happens. Congress is deadlocked, and without compromise, there aren't going to be very many new laws. That doesn't mean that leaders in Congress can't influence the administration. Chairmen of committees can invite the administration to come testify, and that can shape the way the administration behaves. But if the president is going to go down the road towards pressing the green button that fires off a fusillade of new rules and administratively prosecute a pro-climate agenda, he can do that without Congress. He already has a lot of power within the Clean Air Act. If, on the other hand, the president wants to look at sort of a blended strategy or a give a little, take a little strategy, he'll be better off working with Congress to try to find a stable set of incentives that keep production coming, because we're only at the very beginning of the transformation of our energy resource into an economic source of opportunity.
Let me just ask you about regulations, because inadvertently we keep hearing rumors about what would happen if you have more, let's say a carbon tax emission, you're going to have more regulations that are coming down the road. How does that affect you and Hunt Oil, Mr. Hunt?
Our company is Petro Hunt, BQ. Regulation, to me, it's very disturbing. The argument is, of course, been a matter of tax increases. Then the next factor is debt and debt reduction, and they're completely ignoring regulation. And the Clean Air Act has been mentioned here, and we have agencies that are passing regulations, and I have a hard time understanding the difference between a regulation and a law. So in effect, Congress has advocated their ability to pass laws to agencies that are creating all kinds of regulations that are essentially laws. And if we want to move forward and preserve our standard of living and our leadership, not to mention our national status in the U.S., in the world, as concerns our currency, we've got to go back to work, and hopefully regulations will permit this.
Well, that sounds optimistic, but we have a brand new cabinet that's coming in, and you have a new head of the committee with Senator Ron Wyden. Is that good news for you? You've got all these independent oil producers out there, David Martineau. Are they looking forward to this, or what are they concerned about?
We produce probably 70% of the gas and 50% of the oil, and we drill 90% of the wells. And what Mr. Hunt was talking about a minute ago, the regulations that we're seeing in front of us with the EPA and the Fish and Wildlife and BLM. I mean, you know, everybody wants to regulate us. And we've been regulated forever and ever without it being national and done by the states, because we've been drilling wells forever and ever and been fracking wells forever and ever, which is a big issue that's popped up here. And so I'm, you know, hopeful that the independents and the majors have come back into the country somewhat to develop the shale revolution that's happening, which is going to make this country hopefully energy independent, or at least energy secure.
A lot of people are concerned, though, about what's in the fracking chemicals, and they would like to see the fracking chemicals, people be more forthright in what the fracking chemicals contain. John Hofmeister or Bruce Vincent, what is your feeling about that? Do you think that that's a fair thing? Should, you know, people now want to know what's in their food? Should they know what's in the fracking materials? Well, chemicals?
I think that we should disclose the chemicals in fracking, and I think the industry does do that. We actually publish it in the website. The people need to understand that industry has actually been fracking for over 60 years. And in that 60-year period of time, fracking has never caused contamination of freshwater drinking supplies anywhere. So we would certainly expect it to continue to be safe. It is and has been regulated. It's well regulated by the states. The results tell you that. But in terms of chemicals, a very small part of the fracking solution that's pumped down hole do contain chemicals. Those chemicals are currently disclosed and should be. People should know what's going on around them. We have no problem with that at all.
You know, there's been quite a phenomenon, whether it's in South Texas, such as the Eagle Ford, or what you have in various states. And Doug Kane, I wanted you on the panel because you kind of represent every man. You had, has the Lake Truck Lines, which is a trucking company. And the interesting thing about it, because you think of different parts of the country, it being certainly a partisan issue on this, and you think maybe it's one side of the aisle over the other. And former Mayor Henry Cisneros called you a hero for what you're doing in the Eagle Ford Shale. What's going on with you? Why is there such great bipartisan support in South Texas?
Well, energy is not a Republican or a Democrat issue, liberal or conservative. It's an issue that's important to each and every American, hence you calling it the most important issue of our time. I've been tremendously satisfied with seeing how local and state officials have reached across the aisles to try to continue the growth of the oil industry in Texas. For me, we moved our company after 62 years from Houston to San Antonio to be a part of the Eagle Ford Shale. It has been the greatest experience of our life. We grew by 300% the first year there. We're on track to double our size this year. And the message that I kind of want is one of hope. I think that we've become so desensitized to the fact that things just aren't going right in this country that we've lost track of the fact that there's hope for the people of this country, specifically through the energy industry. We have the greatest industry that this world has ever seen, developing energy, right here in our own country, developed by our own countrymen for use on our own shores. And you're absolutely right. We need to be able to do this to have energy independence and absolutely energy security. And I'm very, very proud to be a part of it.
Well,
and thank you for putting me on this panel.
Well, thank you, Doug. I guess the next question, and I'm going to get to you about Mexico in a minute here, but I have another question I want to talk about. Obviously, we have a lot of representatives here that represent traditional oil, natural gas. What about green energy? I mean, does green energy have a place in the mix here with you all? Do you support green energy? Do you believe that the transition between wind and solar and the alternatives has a place with you? And where do you see that working? I'm going to go to you on that one. Come on, Duncan.
It's so often presented to the world as a false dichotomy. It's either or. And the answer of all of the above, I know we're all very familiar with it these days. But the fact is that we do need to explore all of these available options. And we're all here, in some degree, in the energy business. Energy isn't just oil and gas. And energy companies have realized this for a long time. And they've realized that where there are economic opportunities, they will exploit them. It's extraordinary to see how technology advances in relatively short periods of time to take us in directions that we didn't foresee before. Shale being one of them, of course. But you can see it in so many other areas. We have no idea where in 5 years' time we're going to be with regards to solar or wind or geothermal energy or all of the other opportunities that are out there. But the simple fact is that they need to be supplements or complements to the existing energy matrix that we have right now. And there's a space for them. There's absolutely a space for them. Thinking about my own context in Mexico, there are many places in Mexico where the electricity grid just simply doesn't reach. And it makes a lot more sense to actually put in wind turbines or solar panels in those places to get energy to the people that need it. And that takes us back to some of the things that have been said on this panel. Energy, for so many people, is an assumption that you open the fridge door and the light will come on. Well, what if it didn't one day? And that's what many people in the world live with. And so finding the right energy solution for the right situation is key here. And that's why I think that renewables really do play a role.
Well, John, you've done a lot with I mean, here you're a past president of Shell. And a lot of people would think that you would not be interested in anything that has to do with alternative or green. And what is do we look at traditional fossil fuels as a transition to get to a certain place? How long do you have to wait to get there?
Well, energy in total is about molecules and electrons. That's the essence of energy, molecules and electrons. So whether you're an oil and gas company or whether you're a biofuels company, what you want to know is what's the prospect of those molecules turning into real energy. When I sat in a science lab talking to engineers in my former company, and they showed me the diagrams of the carbon molecules of algae, you say, let's develop that resource. Look at those fat carbon molecules that are sitting there just groaning with the weight of all of the carbon in that molecule. How do we take advantage of that? Or how do we take advantage of the free wind that hits us every day, or the free sunshine that hits us every day? So you look at the base elements, and when you look at the base elements, you say, why not? Let's go prove the point or disprove the point. And yes, we're in the early days of technology for biochemistry relative to biomass, early days in the materials that we use in the substrate of solar panels. But you know, we had early day light bulbs for a long time. We had early day Model Ts for a long time. So you put your shoulder to the wheel on these things and you say, why not? All in, all the above is not a bad strategy.
All righty, so we have some questions, though. I think a lot of people would say. The woman who is and the husband who are trying to figure out how to be able to support themselves in a very tough economy say, how much is it going to cost? The people that are having young men and women overseas that are serving in the military are saying, look at Algeria. How safe is it all? And when can we finally be independent, or can we be? So I'm going to start down the road. Bruce, I mean, is it a myth about energy independence? And I mean, it's a global commodity. We're all linked together. Can you really have any kind of energy independence?
Well, it certainly used to be a myth, but with the technological advances you've seen with these shale plays in tight reservoirs, low permeability sandstones and the like, it's a distinct possibility. But I think it's much better to put it in a frame of reference of energy security from America's standpoint, and also in a North American context where you bring in Canada and Mexico into the equation. And I think the real possibility of having energy security in this world exists. There are several very credible forecasts that, for instance, show that the United States could become the largest producer of oil in the next decade, within 7 to 10 years, depending on which forecast you look at. That's remarkable. This is a country that had been depleting its oil supply since 1991 and turned it around and started growing them in 2008 and has grown them every year since. It's remarkable what this country can do with those resources.
In Mexico, they're losing a lot of barrels of oil per day. They're losing, what is it, 900,000 barrels of oil a day? What is it, 30% of their economy? How can we have a partnership with Mexico if they don't have their act together?
But I would say that it's imperative that both the United States and Canada, the other NAFTA partner, really do get involved in what's going on in Mexico once they make the decision to open up. Until they open up, you really can't go in too heavily. You have to tread lightly, otherwise you begin to frighten the process. But we need to be involved in what's going on there because Mexico has enormous natural resources. In terms of oil and gas, obviously we know about those. And Mexico, remember, has the fourth largest reserves of shale gas in the world. And yet they're completely unexploited up to this point. I think that Pemex has drilled 3 exploratory wells. And the simple fact is that the country as it stands right now doesn't have the resources, the money, the know-how, and the technology to really get to the energy that they have in store. But once we make that transition, and that I'm confident that is going to happen, we have a bright future ahead of us in North America. When you add in the oil sands up in Canada, along with their shale resources, all of what's happening that's wonderful in this country, then the potential of Mexico, it's not just that we become energy independent or energy secure. It's about a low cost of energy that is going to benefit not just the energy industry, but the entire economy of this region, making this region the most competitive region in the world.
I want to continue a little bit on energy independence. And one of them actually goes to the issue of Venezuela, because now you have reportedly Hugo Chavez on his deathbed. And, you know, people say maybe that's going to change the future for Citgo and what happens with the oil there. But do we have to really look and see who Venezuela's friends are? Do we see how close Venezuela is in relationship to Iran? Do we worry about relationships with other countries before we say, good, Hugo's gone, now we have a future? What would you say about that, Kevin?
Well, I'd say that the goal of energy independence and the security threats at any one producer nation are really things that we can address differently now with the resource we have. If you ask what do we gain, we don't become free of global trade. In fact, we should never become free of global trade. We want to optimize our energy mix. We want to bring in the oil that's right for our refineries and send out the oil that's right for other people's refineries. We want to export the LNG resource that can go to the Asian utilities that need it very badly right now. And when Hugo Chavez or his successor gets too close to Iran, we want to be able to provide energy resources to players out there who may not have picked a side so that we can be part of the geopolitical mix. Now, as it turns out, you know, the PDVSA changes that took place in the state oil company under Chavez are going to be difficult to reverse. And Iran has its own problems and may not be making many big investments in Venezuela. But over time, we have the power to be influential in a way that we haven't been before, because we can bring resources and knowledge to countries all over the world. And we're starting really a very big change.
And I want to ask one more question in that arena, and I want to go back to the president's agenda. You know, we've had a good relationship. Some people are not as positive on it as others, but we've had a very successful working relationship with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. How do we gauge the security issues after what has happened in Algeria? And it is a global commodity. What do you worry about even with your producers, David Martineau? What is the future there?
Well, you know, when you talk about Algeria, I think that's what's kind of scary with all the foreign countries and the problems we have with them, that when we all of a sudden now have an opportunity to develop, as we say, whether you add in Mexico and Canada to the shale plays, and we think we can become independent. We've dropped our money. Let's say we were importing about 70%. Now we import 40%. And if we continue drilling, as long as we've got the right to do it, but you know, when you hear about the problems we're having, you know, with regulations and with tax proposals they want to do, they're going to slow drilling down, and they're going to be relying on those foreign countries where we could do it ourselves if we could just open up the gate for the drilling in this country. And
but is that really realistic? I mean, think about it. And I put this to all of you, and do not hesitate to answer. If let's say we want to have this great energy independence, and we abandon working with the Middle East, what happens to nations like Saudi Arabia if the United States and other communities walk out? Does that destabilize the world? Does it make it a much more uneven situation in a Middle East that already has problems? Any one of you?
It could absolutely destabilize the world more than any other country that we have. And we certainly should continue to work with them and be partners with them. But my bigger concern is not our policy there. It's something happening with the political leadership in Saudi Arabia, and whether the Arab Spring and the revolutions happening in North Africa extend further into the Middle East. Because Saudi Arabia is the largest producer of crude oil today and could either put more on the market very quickly or take quite a bit off very quickly, which would have a substantial impact on the price of crude oil.
I'd like to add here that, I mean, we tend to think about this very much from the point of view of the United States. But if the United States begins to import less oil from Saudi Arabia, there's somebody else who's going to be delighted to import that oil, and that's China and India and the other developing nations, where demand is doing the exact opposite of what we're seeing in the United States, where it's exploding. And for the foreseeable future, we're seeing very, very strong demand for liquid fuels throughout the world. Now, this is a real opportunity for United States foreign policy to disengage from the Middle East to a certain degree, and why not let some other countries actually become interested in that for a while? If we don't need it, then what's the real point of us spending lives and money going over there? Now, the answer to that is, of course, that, well, our corporations are very active there. They have strong economic interests over there as well, and we need to think seriously about that. But the simple fact is that the United States' role in the world is by definition going to have to change because of the changes in the global energy industry. And I think that's a fascinating thing to talk about in the future.
And what is that change going to entail, and how will the president do this? Does the president, he looks at you all, and in many cases, some of you are more tied in with traditional fossil fuels and natural gas. You're looked at in many cases as, the dinosaur that they're trying to eliminate. Does the president take this opportunity, his moment in time, to bypass you and enact any kind of executive orders?
Can I speak to that?
Absolutely. Any of you can speak up at any time.
I'd like to point out that the oil and gas industry has given this nation and the citizens the biggest gift they could ever receive. That is low-cost energy. Our natural gas, as far as the industrial world or the industrializing nations, our natural gas is 3 to 4 times cheaper than Europe. It is 4 to 5 times cheaper than Asia. Our oil is about approximately 20% cheaper than the rest of the world's oil because we are working off of West Texas Intermediate pricing versus the rest of the world working on Brent pricing. Now, energy is the ability to perform work. If you look it up in your dictionary, that's one of the definitions. And we have the opportunity, if we will only develop and utilize our energy, to be the most competitive nation in the world. For too long, we had the word outsource, where we sent our manufacturing capability overseas. Now, appearing is insourcing. In other words, much of that is coming back, and it's energy costs that's bringing it back. So the most misguided policy we could have is to try and make our energy more costly so we won't use fossil fuel.
Well, we have a lot of energy that we're not using. What's going to happen with coal? Coal looks like it's got the initials RIP next to it. What about nuclear? Where is that headed? I throw this out to you all.
Well, if I can, I want to address something.
Well, let's keep on the, well, let me go back to this one. I want to know what's going to happen with coal and nuclear, and where is that headed? Kevin, do you want to talk about that?
I think it'd be too soon to declare the death of coal. It burns the same all the world over. And so the fact that we're using less of it here frees up a significant volume for export to countries that want it. And this is where one of those presidential policy questions, in fact, broader policy questions, deserves to be asked. There's about 150 million tons a year of export capacity planned for the West Coast in Oregon and Washington. And if you think about it, that's where you want the coal to go out to get to the customers that it wants to reach. But if you have a slowdown in the permitting to get those export facilities built, you will have a problem, because you can't displace all the coal that you've been burning in your power plants, keep mining coal here at home, and not sell it somewhere else. So natural gas is not the only abundant, low-cost fossil fuel that we have for export. We have coal too, and we should be selling that overseas as well.
Thank you, Kevin.
Go ahead.
I think there's a myth that has to be penetrated and essentially dealt with head-on, and that myth is that we're post-hydrocarbon. This notion that we are now or soon could be post-hydrocarbon is an utter nonsense that some who articulate it only speak to because that is their personal interest, their personal ideology, and they don't have a care in the world about the implications of that wish on the average human being, both in this country and on Earth.
Who do you think's driving that, John? Who are they?
There is an elite, ideologically driven, so-called intelligentsia that sees opportunity beyond what is reasonable and what is practical.
Are they activists?
We have invested for over 100 years in a hydrocarbon-based economy that has a long run rate left in it that we're not going to divest anytime soon. And we have so much more affordable energy in the ground that we know how to produce, that if we want quality of life and we want national security and we want economic value creation domestically, then we'd better produce it. Otherwise, we will impoverish ourselves and live with gas lines and blackouts, thinking that some aspirational, mythical journey can occur sometime in the next decade or two, when in fact it cannot and it will not. And I hope the President and I hope the decision makers that he appoints and that the Congress, that we elect to Congress, recognize that reality.
Let me throw this out at you then, very casually, and hope to get your response from all of you. Is the President's attempt to limit the natural gas exportation a way to basically say no more hydrofracking, to try to put a clamp on hydraulic fracturing? What do you say?
Well, if you put a clamp on hydraulic fracturing, you'd drive the cost of natural gas up in the double digits, because virtually 90+% of the gas wells drilled today use hydraulic fracturing. Forget about exporting. You would drive the domestic supply down into the dirt if you actually did that. And there would be no reason. Why would you do that? Hydraulically fracturing is a technology that's been used safely for over 60 years. Why, for God's sake, would you think about outlawing any technology?
So why do you think the president and his agenda is going to try to limit the exportation of natural gas? What's your thought on that?
Well, I don't know that we know the president's agenda on the exportation.
You have
yet
a
of
comment
nat-
on that?
of
You,
natural
Kevin
gas,
Buck?
but
I mean, sorry to jump in here. I think what we've got is 4 decades of running out of energy working against us. There's a scarcity psychology that's informed the system we have. We're hoarding energy by design, and that policy has to be rewritten to accommodate what we've got now. Being in the energy business in America today isn't just about hoarding energy. It's about producing here to sell over there. And if you want the supply to stick around, you better make sure it can find a market. So part of what's at stake here is really dealing with this age of adequacy and saying, how do we unravel all the rules of the game, because the game has changed.
So what is the game change now? I mean, obviously, do we want to be seen as hoarders? Is that what we are, David Martineau? Are we a bunch of hoarders in this country?
Hoarders, did you say?
H-O-A-R-D-E-R-S. Hoarders. Are we hoarders?
We're not hoarding anything. I mean, when you look what the energy industry does for everything, these plastic bottles, you name it. In other words, if we didn't have the energy industry, 85% of the energy comes from coal, oil, or natural gas. That's what's made us the nation we are, because we've got the energy and we can continue having it. You know, we've been declining, no doubt about it, for many, many years. And now all of a sudden, the decline has turned around and come back up. So we're sort of catching back up a little bit. You know, how many dollars do we spend on importing oil? Unbelievable. I mean, well, we could take that same money and drill with that money, produce jobs, produce revenue. I mean, we give so much money to the government, you know, that people don't think about. They call it subsidies for us. We don't have any subsidies. I've never gotten a check in my life for drilling a dry hole.
What do you want to say about that, Chuck? And I see you're ready to bite on this.
No, I mean, what I'd like to say is that I think that, you know, it's incredible how the energy industry in general is one of the most innovative sectors of the economy, and their ability, I mean, you mentioned, are they dinosaurs? Well, if they are, they're rapidly evolving, and they always have done. I mean, these are companies which are able to respond to changes in the market, to respond to government policies, to respond to changing political situations, security situations around the world. They're the bravest companies in the world in terms of what they do, and it's extraordinary. I mean, talking about what goes on in deep water exploration, I was saying to somebody earlier on, it's like a Jules Verne novel. I mean, it's 20,000 leagues under the sea, you know, including the giant squid, I understand. But anyway, you know, these are companies which are really able to react in the right way as long as they're given the right regulatory legal framework in which to do so. And I say this from experience in Mexico, where the private sector is held back in an unnecessary way. Everybody suffers.
So do you see Mexico changing their constitution? Because obviously, you know, Pemex, they're not so good about accepting private investors. Wouldn't you have to change the constitution in Mexico to make that happen?
Yeah, so we're looking at an extraordinary sea change that's potentially going to happen this year. Mexico going through a legal and constitutional change to allow for private investment, not in the national oil company, but in the oil sector in general, to allow private companies to partner with Pemex, the national oil company, to engage in all kinds of exploration and production activities. That possibility is a truly exciting one. And I'd say that, you know, of all the countries around the world, the one that shows the highest potential upside this year is Mexico. And thinking into the future, we could say, well, maybe the same could be true for Venezuela in the long term once things begin to shift. But, you know, all the other countries that we look at have already gone through a very positive shift. Look at Brazil. You know, Brazil 20 years ago was a backward energy nation, and now it's one of those countries that has gone through a change. Mexico has yet to go through that, but once it does, I think we're looking at a very, very positive story.
Doug, I want to talk to you about the regulations that your truckers have to go through, because I'm sure you have a lot of regulations. What would happen, let's say, if you had to do some sort of bipartisan, or I should say some arrangement with Mexico and the United States? Do you see more problems in the border area? Or are you even experiencing more problems in the border area? Because you're right down there by Laredo.
We have a tremendous presence in South Texas, of course. We're in Laredo every day. So far, there doesn't seem to be any problem. There is no cross-border traffic of the oil field industry, as it were. There is a lot of good equipment that comes from Mexico, a lot of it that we purchase, and there's a great manufacturing base there. But so far, there has been absolutely no trouble, and I think it's over-dramatized in the media what's going on down in South Texas. It's a safe environment to work out of, and we don't seem to have any problems.
Well, what you're referring to is how the borders have changed with a bit of narco trafficking that hasn't affected any of your business. You and I talked about this earlier. You said that, I asked how do you do business with a country that's had a very large problem with the narco traffickers? How does that influence an industry like the oil business?
Well, it's an extraordinary thing. Around the world, oil companies have to deal with delicate political and security situations. I mean, just think of what's happened in Algeria, in Nigeria, in countries around the world. And so I don't think that the security problems with Mexico has really frightened off any potential investors in this sector. And I don't think it will once Mexico goes through the change that will open up things to private investment. What is extraordinary is to have somebody here from the border, and I have to say that we need to have more people from the border here in Washington, D.C., because there's a view from Washington towards the border and towards Mexico that really doesn't get it. And I think that having somebody who lives there and who works there on a daily basis is terrific, because we know that, in fact, the violence hasn't crossed the border. We know that the United States border cities are the safest cities in the United States of America. It's extraordinary. And just across the border in Mexico, you've got the most dangerous cities in Mexico. And so you have a very, very interesting situation down there. Is the security situation going to frighten off investors? I doubt it very much. And actually, I think we're going to see increasing good news on the security.
Yeah, I mean, as an operator in South Texas, we have found that we've had to increase security in our operations and our leasehold down there, but you're having to do that in most places. It's nothing compared to what you have to do internationally, though, in terms of security. But it's certainly not frightening away investors, it's not frightening away operators, but having a higher level of security in your operations is a must today.
You know, the hydraulic fracturing process uses a lot of water. And a question here is, what is the evidence that there will be sufficient water resources in places like Texas and elsewhere to support the activities of the oil and gas industry as well as other economic and societal activities? How do you respond to that? Any of you?
Water becomes a very regional issue. In South Texas, as an example, where we have extensive operations, there is an abundance of underground aquifers and even surface water that we're able to access, and there are no supply issues whatsoever. Another issue that comes with water is also disposal of water. Disposal in South Texas is also easy because we have a number of underground formations where you can re-inject it safely. But you go into some other areas where you don't have an abundance of either surface water or underground water, it becomes a bigger issue. And you have to deal with that regionally. But one of the things the industry has been doing is looking at alternative ways to do hydraulic fracturing with things such as nitrogen, for instance, that can minimize the use of water.
Should there be a global treaty on water? Because obviously the water supply not just affects Texas, it affects the world. What do you say about that?
Not when it's a regional issue. I don't think you want a global treaty on something that differs from one region to the next.
The state of Texas, believe it or not, only uses 1% of its water in the energy business. And the other percent is used for flushing your commode or watering your plants or whatever it is. And people don't realize that. They all say all the way. And it's interesting that when you burn gas, it goes up to heaven, gets in the cloud, and rains again. It cycles, and people don't understand that, really. So, you know, they say, oh, we're going to use up all the water by fracking these wells and coming up with natural gas. And you burn that gas, and it becomes water. And they've done a calculation. I don't have it right on my head, but we don't, the area that is the sectors where you have a lot of fresh water nearby. I mean, they're talking about on the Gulf Coast, you know, you go overseas to Iran, and they go to the Gulf, they go to the Gulf, whatever it is, and they convert that water. We could get water that way if necessary. If all of a sudden we're in a drought in Texas, big time, and that's been talked about. that maybe you could go ahead and get the water out of the Gulf of Mexico and convert it. And also, there's a group called the Barnett Shale Water Conservation Management Committee, and what they are doing is working on various methodologies of converting the frack water once it gets dirty by fracking into the rock and it comes back up, to put it through a process, osmosis, I mean, you know, different ways. And so you can clean the water up and refrack with it, in other words. So you're not going to use up all the water, as everybody says.
John?
This is where the public really should hear from the industry. What are the risk management and what are the assurance plans for the future of fracking and these issues? There are 3 industries in this country that I submit have the brain power that moves us clearly and rapidly into a robust 21st century. That brain power exists in the aerospace world, the medical and healthcare world, and the energy world, all kinds of energy. And when you think of the graduates and the human factor that goes into these industries, and you think about the technology that gets applied to problem solving. So while I'm not predicting this, I think there will be massive movement towards waterless fracking as we go into this century deeper and deeper. I think there will be, where we do use water, site-based water management systems that basically clean the water on site so that that water can be reused over and over again. Just as we see in the operating rooms of America or in the outer space explorations that we take, you have a problem, put the minds that are working in the industry to work, you'll solve those problems. That's happening every day. It's how we have gotten to where we are in terms of moving back towards energy independence from where we were, which was ever greater energy dependence. It's the technology that will matter, and it's the people, the human beings, that bring their awareness, their knowledge, and their applied skills into play. And the American public can be totally reassured that as bad as the Macondo disaster was, and it was a horrible, horrible disaster, it's fixed. The people fixed it because they figured it out. And so now we have even more safeguards that the industry is using, even better equipment, even better trained people. So yes, risk happens and risk exists, incidents happen, but I have constant faith in the ability of the people in the industry, and the same applies to the renewable and the opportunities we see for decarbonizing emissions that applies to something like fracking.
Right. So I'm going to throw this out to all of you. One of the questions that came up from you in the audience, and I think it's falls right into this pattern. While fracking may reduce U.S. dependency on unfriendly energy sources, doesn't it distract us from the ultimate goal of ending fossil fuel use?
Whose goal is that, ending fossil fuel use? I mean, they obviously need to turn off the lights, close the air conditioning down, and walk home. Because if you didn't have energy, you wouldn't be able to be living the way we live today. What are they talking about?
That's the question. Any other comments on that?
You've got to have an alternative to fossil fuels that allows you to be competitive in a global economy. I mean, we live and work in a global world. It's not just isolated in America, and we can't take the cost of energy to this country and quadruple it, for instance, even if you could supply it, and expect to be competitive in the world. Fossil fuels, by virtually any study you look at, are going to continue to dominate the supply of energy for this country and the world for decades to come. The concept of moving away from fossil fuels, certainly probably in our lifetime, it just isn't something that's going to happen. And so we have to focus energy policy on what's going to supply the vast majority of our energy for decades to come.
Duncan?
We have to put all these things in the real long-term perspective, I think. It's that, we've been through a number of energy revolutions throughout human history, that we moved from sort of solid fuels onto liquid fuels. We're making a gradual transition to gas-based fuels. Some of those are hydrocarbons. Eventually, we may move to a hydrogen-based fuel source at some point. Ultimately, we may just move to the invisible fuel that comes from the sun at some point in the future. But these are revolutions that took thousands of years to happen. We've only been really in the hydrocarbons phase for 160 years, I guess. And most of that time, coal was more important than oil. And so we're still relatively young. And whilst it may be what's going to happen, I don't think any of us would expect that to happen anytime soon.
All right, I'm going to ask, I'm going to go to Kevin, and then I have another question over there for Doug. All right, Kevin, I'm going to give you some names, and you're going to tell me who's the most powerful, okay? I'll just throw them out, and you maybe can tell me how that plays. The President, Congress, the Bureau of Land Management, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Interior, the Department of Defense. Who has more authority over the industry at large and also the future of alternative and green resources?
Well, I don't want to alienate any important agencies by picking a favorite.
No, answer the question.
The unitary executive who sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue shapes the policy agenda of all of the agencies you named. He calls the shots, and to a far greater extent than appreciated, appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president define the agendas that those agencies prosecute for energy environmental policy.
Okay, so I lied. I have another question. So should we have a czar? Should we have a czar that overtakes us? Obviously, who is getting the president's ear? Should we have a unified czar over all of those agencies that affect you? Or how would you like to see it work out?
I think you would have to say that that czar is our president, because he sits over them and he ignores Congress. And they have passed laws that they have never read, 10,000 pages long, 5,000 pages long, that give these agencies the ability to pass regulations which are laws.
So I guess this goes back to the opening part of this. Are these determinations made on the moment? Are they made for power, political control? Are they really made for the interests of the American people and the world? What would you say about that? And I'll take it all the way down.
Political control.
Expediency.
Mr. Hunt?
It's total control.
Mr. Book?
Politicians do what they have to do to get reelected. Congress votes for what's in the ground at home. We've clocked it about 75% of the time. The president uses every advantage he can when he's in a reelection race.
Mr. Hoffmeister?
Special interest and special interest money have more to determine outcomes than real, genuine American-based public policy.
Mr. Kane?
Power and control.
And I think it's ideological that drives most of that. It's certainly not what is best for this country.
Okay, another quick one, or all the way back down, starting with you, Mr. Vincent. Do you believe that solar and wind are getting more support from the administration than the ox that's grinding the corn?
They certainly are in terms of public discourse, but I think solar and wind ought to be getting some of the attention that they get. It's good for us to be doing research and development there. It is a part of our energy equation, and we need to understand that. We need to try to build scale, improve technologies. But in terms of public discourse, you would think that's where everything was going.
Now, I want it to go very quickly through you guys. Give me a quick answer.
Absolutely. It's got to be a part of it, but the administration is probably giving it more credit than it should at this point.
Double down on the R&D future of these forms of energy. Stop spending money on applied old technology that is never going to be efficient.
Kevin?
When you wake up with a whole box of how to do it the easy way, it's a hard question, to borrow from your title, whether or not you want to keep spending up to do it the hard way. I think you want to rebalance the portfolio for the energy you've got and worry less about the energy you can't yet have.
Mr. Hunt?
There's been so much money wasted at this point through the Solyndras and the whole host of other bankruptcies. I have to say that their future should be limited.
Duncan, quickly.
We live in the neighborhood of a huge ball of burning hydrogen. It would be stupid to ignore it.
David, last quick comment?
I've yet to see a car with a windmill on the back or a panel. You know, I don't know what they're thinking about because,
All right.
well, then why are they not successful? Why don't we see them every day? Yeah, they cost a fortune, exactly.
All right,
Oil and gas doesn't cost a fortune. That's
This
your
is the
answer.
last one, and keep it short and to the point. And I'm going to go through all of you, right down, starting with you, David. What do you see for the next 4 years with this president as far as you're concerned with energy? Quickly.
Well, I think that there's a good chance he might jump on it and realize how important energy is for this country, even though he wanted to do it with fossil fuels in several of his speeches, that he might want to go ahead and really give the energy a boost, in my opinion, so he can go out and say, look what I did for the country.
Duncan?
And
President Obama has a unique opportunity over the next 4 years to put the United States at the forefront of the global energy industry once again, and I think he should seize that.
I hope that he will do it, and it will be a matter of saving our currency as the world's reserve currency.
He's not the president of the sun or of the wind. He's the president of the United States. I think his economic focus will drive a bigger look at fossil fuels, but I don't expect him to give up on green energy either.
If it's only rhetoric, we'll be where we are 4 years from now. If it's substance and is meaningful, the industry's ready to go.
I agree. I think it's just going to be rhetoric, but I don't think he's going to cut off his nose to spite his face. There's too much at stake with natural gas, and he may make a nod to green energy, but he's not going to shut down the oil industry.
Priest?
I'm a big believer in looking at behavior, not listening to words. I expect to see more of the same.
All right, I have one final question because I think we've been remiss about this. And so I will throw this out. I want a quick, concise answer because we have not said enough about the future of nuclear energy. They say it's hardly been mentioned. We're mentioning it. So what's going to happen with nuclear energy?
It's going to be where it is today.
Since we built our last plant, and you know, I mean, we could use it, but for, you know, somebody got killed a long time ago, so they quit doing it.
So what you're saying is we're influenced by the press?
Yeah.
Is the press biased?
I think Congress is biased.
Nuclear meltdowns are extraordinarily spectacular when we see them in the press, and we all worry about that, and we all recognize that nuclear energy is an important part of the matrix, but who wants to live next to a nuclear power plant?
It's incredibly
and
clean.
It's that NIMBY attitude, not in my backyard, that really affects all of us. We believe that it's important, but we don't want to live next to it.
John? Any comments on nuclear?
I think it's time for a game change. I think we have gone with radioactive uranium about as far as we're going to take it. I think the game change is a different fissionable material. Let's look at thorium very seriously. Let's see if we can't change it for the 21st century.
Any other comments from you gentlemen on that issue? Well, this is the end of the first panel. I want to thank our spectacular panelists for being open to the hard question. They're very courageous, and we look forward to more dialogue. And coming up after a short break, we'll be back with our next panel as we talk about global warming, the science or hype.
My change has never gotten to my bio, so that's my bio.
Oh,
Well done, gentlemen. Well done.
Very